All right, so I've got everybody unmuted. How is everybody?
Good.
Doing good.
Pretty fine.
Pretty good.
Good, good, good. So, couple of things before we get started. I actually had a webinar last night with College Board to get a little bit more information on how they're actually going to pull off this AP exam with the DBQ. And I want to just give you as much information as I have when I get it. And then as more comes in, we can kind of sort through more of that. So let me share my screen here. Is the sound better today than it was on Monday?
Yes.
Okay, I put on the microphone today because I think that that will help a little bit. Okay, so let me show you. I took some notes last night from the webinar and give you just some of the details, and I'll type all this up and give it to you. Basically, what they were telling us is that there will be different versions for the international students and then the late exams. So there will be a late exam in June. So if you are in the middle of this and I don't know, your power goes off or something crazy happens, there is no need to panic, okay? If something goes crazy, there's going to be a place for you to report that, and then they will automatically send you a ticket to take the makeup on June the 3rd. All right, so hopefully that should kind of calm down your fears of any sort of, difficulty during all of this. The way that they said that this is going to work is that you're going to receive an electronic ticket that is unique to you. So when you registered for your AP exam back in September, that created the account, and then the account will be sent this access to the exam for May the 15th. All right, so the regular exam is May 15th, and they're going to send this to you. I'm not sure exactly which day. Now, there's two places that you can access it, either from the email that you used when you created your account, or in the AP student account, which is, I'm assuming, what we've used with AP Classroom. So those are the two places that your unique electronic ticket to get your exam will be sent for May the 15th. And then they're going to ask that you log on about 15 to 30 minutes early using that electronic ticket. And then there's going to be a bunch of security screens that you're going to have to go through, and some test of your technology and all of that they want totally out of the way before 2 o'clock arrives on May the 15th. So this is where you're supposed to find all of that. If you need a computer, all right, I think we can all agree that taking this on a cell phone would not be ideal. I cannot imagine typing a DBQ on a phone. If you need a computer, you need to let me know as soon as possible, because evidently College Board has been able to secure thousands of Chromebooks that they are mailing out to students who are in need of a computer on a temporary loan. And so it would be almost like checking something out from the library. They would send you that computer and then you would send it back. So if that applies to you, if you need a computer, please, please, please let me know. I have to let them know by April the 24th, any of my students who are in need of that. All right. If you're going to be typing this, there's not going to be a lockdown browser, which means that it's not going to stop you from going to other screens, which actually is a good thing, not in terms of looking things up, but because now you can type in one screen and then have the prompt in the other screen at the same time. So I'm going to show you what I'm talking about there in just a second. So what you would want to do if you're typing, the ideal method for this is to have two windows open on your monitor, one for the prompt, one for Word. So it's not going to be some funky thing where, you're going to have the grammar check and all that stuff. Not that they're checking any of that, but it's something that you're used to by using Word. Then when you finish it, you would save it and upload it. Okay. here's the other really good news that's come out of this from last night is that you can print the prompt in the documents to have those in front of you. If you don't want to just use it on the screen and scroll up and down, you can print it out and have it there in front of you. So again, this would be the security checks. And once you finish those security checks in the 15 to 30 minutes prior to the exam, then you'll be in a waiting room, sort of like we do here in Zoom. And then right at 2 o'clock, it will open the browser and you'll start the exam. Here's the other good news. They're going to give you a countdown timer on the screen where the prompt is. The timer is going to have 50 minutes. So you have 45 minutes to take the exam and then 5 minutes to upload. And with 5 minutes to go, it's going to start flashing red to try to get your attention that you need to finish, you need to save, and you need to upload, because it must be uploaded by that 50-minute point. So they were pretty clear that if it goes beyond that 50-minute point and you haven't submitted, you don't get a score. Okay, so that's going to be, honestly, they were saying that this was the part that they were most fearful of in terms of all of this working, is that kids not pay attention to the time and it run out and they not realize it. So I had suggested that maybe they have some sort of an alarm that goes off when there's 5 minutes to go. Who knows if they'll actually take that advice. And then the big, I mean, this whole thing took last night about an hour. And they probably spent about 20 minutes of it talking about the technology they're using to catch cheaters. And by cheating, what they're talking about is collaboration. If you're using any sort of connection to other students, to other people in your house, somehow they have this technology, and they wouldn't share with us what the technology is, but they've gotten it from, it almost sounded to me like the banking industry, where they can catch fraud and that kind of thing. And they were very clear that they said that they've already caught one student who was already planning some sort of connection with other kids to try to plan out how to cheat on the AP exam. They've already caught that kid, and he was stunned at how they figured it out. But they were very clear that they are going to be very vigilant about it. And bottom line, just don't even try it. And then they're going to be providing the list of people who either cheated or they believe were in the attempts of trying to cheat. And they will be sending those to college admissions officers. So that's the information that I have. Do any of you have any, let me unmute everybody again. Do any of you have any questions or comments about any of that I can help clear up?
So if we choose to write out the essay,
Yep.
We can do that. Did you get any information about, like, is it the same standard as in class where we would do it double-lined, blue or black ink, notebook paper?
They just said that you could write it out. I would assume that you could do it any way that you wanted. And then they said that you would take a picture of that and then upload it. But what you would need to remember is that in that 5-minute window, you're going to have to be able to take the photograph, email it to yourself, save it to a Word document, and upload it. So, I mean, it certainly can be done, but it would definitely be something you would need to practice. So, yeah, they said you could do it either way, type it or handwrite it. Good question. Anything else?
So for the exam, like, are we allowed to use?
Sage or Elizabeth?
No, this is Elizabeth.
Okay.
So for the exam, are we like able to use our notes then?
Yeah, and here's the thing. All right, I'm going to back up just a second. It is open note, as they say, and they know that. That's why they're only giving you 45 minutes. And if you did the practice DBQs that we're going to go through today, I did them yesterday, and I'll be honest with you, that 45 minutes, that is tough. And if you think you have time to actually look things up, you're costing yourself points that you could get by just going ahead and writing it. Mr. Minnick and I spent a good bit of time talking about this. And we really, really, really would recommend that you write it as you normally would. And then if you need to look up something just real quick, like the name of something that, you know, you just forgot a particular name, you know what you're looking for, but you just don't remember the actual name, that might be something that you could look up. But if you're looking for content to try to write about, you don't have time to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. And the questions, I think they have made it pretty clear that the question that they're going to be using is not something that you're going to be able to Google and just say causes of the American Revolution and find it very easily. So they are very aware that students would be able to look things up, and the question is not going to be conducive to you doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else have a question? These are good.
So would you recommend that we like have our like vocab lists out next to us?
Potentially. Again, I think I would maybe have them around in case you wanted to use them. But again, you've got to really be aware of the time frame here. How many of you did this yesterday or earlier this week and really tried to stick to the 45 minutes?
It was like really hard to
It
like.
was really hard. Can you imagine if you're trying to fumble around and look stuff up? I almost think it would be too tempting to have it there and cost yourself time. But you know, maybe if it's a question that you absolutely know nothing about, then maybe refer to that. But honestly, I think I would probably just try to take it straight up to be able to maximize your time. They also told us, because all the teachers were complaining about the 45 minutes, and they also said that the way that they're going to handle this is once all of them are scored, then they're going to go back and figure out what the cut score is. And they said that the numbers of 3s, 4s, and 5s will not change significantly. It'll be in line with where it always is. So if they find this prompt really, really easy and everybody does really good, then they're going to be a lot stricter on how many points you have to have for a 3, 4, and 5. If everybody is struggling with the 45 minutes and they don't do very well, then they're going to back it down, and fewer points will be needed for a 3, fewer points needed for a 4 and 5, etc. But it's going to be aligned with where there are normally the score distributions, if that makes sense. Any questions?
I know, I don't know if this is just like my brain, but I know one time when we did the DBQ, there were more than one prompt, like, and we could choose one of them. Is that still?
Good question. They said no, it's one prompt, no choice. Any others? All right, let's go ahead and start looking at the practice ones, if that's okay with you guys. And if you have any more questions about this, certainly shoot me an email and I'll try to get those answered. And we'll be getting more information, and you'll be getting information about practicing your access the last week of April. So you will have the ability to do that. All right, let me show you what I'm talking about with having the two screens pulled up. So let me share my screen again. Whoops. All right. So let's do the basic here. All right, share screen. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to share. Switch to, no, I don't know what I'm doing here. All right, hang on. I want to share my computer screen. Okay, can you see my computer screen now? So what I did, I pulled up, so I downloaded the prompt that we're going to be practicing today. So what I would do is I would have one here, and I would have a blank Word document over here. Does that make sense? So then as if you're typing, you would be able to scroll through the documents over here as you are typing over here. Does that make sense? So you would want to have the two windows open if you're going to type it and not be able to print it out. Got it? Yes.
So for printing them,
Uh-huh.
we would have to print like during when we're taking the actual test.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So let's go ahead and look at the ones that that I gave you to practice with. I thought the first one was easier than the second one. So if we go and we look at the prompt itself, and I took this just like you, and we're going to look at my answer since I didn't have any of yours to work from. Did any of you use the planning sheet? Anybody try using this?
I did.
All right, so you know, it may be helpful, it may not be. I don't know that it's as critical at this point since you're going to be able to print it. Because again, you don't want to lose too much time filling all this in. I had created this thinking that, and Mr. Minnick and I didn't think you were going to be allowed to print it. But if you want to use this, totally fine. All right, so if we look at the prompt to start with, evaluate the relative importance of the different causes. Clearly, this is a causation question of the rising tensions between the colonists and the British government in the time period 1754 to 1776. So this is going to be the French and Indian War up through the Declaration of Independence. And so that's going to give us our time frame that we need to stay in. All right, so this first document, North Carolina, I thought this was important because this is talking about the Stamp Act, but even in North Carolina, there were protests about that. So that tells me that it was beyond Boston. We tended to focus a lot on Boston about the developments leading up to the Revolution, but here this is showing it in another colony, and North Carolina was not really one of those colonies that was well developed. They didn't have this you know, large port cities and all of that. So if they have this type of protest there, that's pretty significant. Then document 2, they're talking about, if we look at the time period here, 1767. So this would have been after they take out the Stamp Act. And so what they're bringing back in are these taxes on household goods. So this would sort of be like the Townsend Acts that we know are going to be more far-reaching. This we should be very familiar with. So you've got the Bloody Massacre here, Paul Revere, 1770. We know that this is Boston Massacre. So as soon as I see this, I can definitely know that this is historical situation, and what Paul Revere is trying to do is to persuade other colonies to join in, okay? So others to join. Then we've got this order from Thomas Gage to a colonel in 1775, and this is all talking about going to Concord and getting all of those weapons. So this historical situation, we know that this is Lexington and Concord. Lexington is not mentioned in here, so that might be something that you could bring in historical situation. And then also this last one, Declaration of Independence. This is where we could pick up a little bit of time knowing what we know, where we start seeing all of these he's. So this is the list of grievances. So there are a lot of other parts to the Declaration of Independence. They've given us the list of grievances. What we might also use in here as historical situation could be the natural rights discussion. That is not part of the document, but is part of the Declaration of Independence. That could also be beneficial to us as well. All right, so that is a quick overview of the documents. Now, you could have organized this a bunch of different ways. Here's what I decided to do. I made my little jot list here. I kind of came up with briefly what I might use for sourcing for each of those. And then I started to group. And I put them into 3 groups. You may have had 2 groups. I went with 3. So I went with unfair taxation, That would be documents 1 and 2. I went with military abuse, documents 3 and 4, and then I threw in the American identity, where over the course of all of this, Americans begin to view themselves as separate, and so that would be the Declaration of Independence. Then I wanted to go back and start thinking about outside information, and the more I've looked at this rubric, outside information, these are your money points, because if you look at the use of documents, you get, if you use 2 documents, using all 5 documents really does not get you a ton of points. You could get 1 more point right here with supporting 4 of the 5 documents, but look at how you get 2 full points for using outside information. To me, it's going to be more critical that you do sourcing and outside information rather than stressing out over using all 5 documents. Does that make sense? Any questions so far? Anybody have any questions? All right, so here's where I just started to kind of think about some other examples of unfair taxation that weren't used. So the Sugar Act was one that I had come up with. Bunker Hill could have been another one where you've got military occupation or military incidents or events that take place before the war even begins. And then with growing American identity, I chose common sense, which I think is a good piece of outside information that discusses the students who are, I don't even know what I just said. I got a text and got distracted. So again, when you're taking your DBQ, don't have your phone around. That also threw me off yesterday. But common sense, I think, would be a good one. All right, any questions about the planning? All right, so what I want to do, I'm going to use my example, and I'm going to highlight different parts of this as we go. So as I go through, did any of you write this and share it with a friend and try to score it? Anybody try that? I would highly recommend it. I think it would be a great opportunity. Okay, so as we go through, the first part, obviously in that introductory paragraph, we need to look at contextualization. So let me just stop here again and make sure everybody's with me and unmute. Anybody have any questions or comments? Any? No?
No.
Okay. All right, so let's go back. Okay, so for my contextualization, what I would want to really look at, this question is all about the tension that is growing between the colonists and the British. So my contextualization would go back to prior to the tension. Well, how did they work together? They worked together through mercantilism and in the French and Indian War. So here's what I wrote. So this would be my context. British North American colonies enjoyed relatively peaceful relations with the mother country prior to the French and Indian War, right? So I'm talking about peaceful relationships. The mercantilist arrangement, there's my vocabulary word. You want to have vocab in your context. The mercantilist arrangement, whereby the colonies provided raw materials to Great Britain, allowed the European power to grow and prosper. All right. Can I just throw out mercantilism and not define it? No, I've got to define it. Okay, so here I'm saying that they provide the raw materials to Great Britain, allowed the European power to grow and prosper. In return, the colonies developed thriving colonial legislatures to govern themselves in local matters during this period of salutary neglect. All right, so here is my definition of salutary neglect and mercantilism in my context. But then I've got to transition now to where things change. Following the costly French and Indian War, Great Britain was heavily in debt, and the relationship with North American colonies changed and ultimately resulted in Revolutionary War. All right, so there's my transition into this particular essay. And then here's my thesis. Rising tension between the American colonists and the British government during the period 1754 to 1776 was caused by more direct taxation of the colonies. So there's my first body paragraph. Military oversight of the colonies by the Red Coat Army, and most importantly, so again, if all of these are causes, which the question clearly is asking about causes, then I need to prioritize. Most importantly, the growing American identity adopted by the colonists of all North American regions. All right, could you have prioritized this differently? Could you say that taxation is the most important part? Yes. Could you talk about the military crisis? Yes. All right, let me stop again and ask if there are any questions about my intro. Any questions about that one? Any questions?
No.
No? All right. So let's go back. So then in my first body paragraph, I'm going to have a topic sentence. The implementation of new taxes directly on the colonists by the British Parliament following the French and Indian War was one cause of the tension between Britain and her colonies. Okay. A North Carolina newspaper from 1765 reported large numbers of colonists protesting the Stamp Act tax by burning the effigy of a supporter of the tax. The article also indicates the colonists believed there was still some hope for them to secure their liberty and not give up the protest. All right, so there's my description. Have I quoted anything from the document?
No.
Nope, I've not quoted anything, but I've got where the newspaper's from and I've got a description of it. All right, so there's my described. This shows the growing tension between the colonists and Great Britain because even a more remote colony like North Carolina had public displays of protest over the newly implemented stamp tax. Okay, so would that be support? Have I shown why this is an example of a new tax on the colonists causing unrest and tension? I think so, because I've indicated that this is another colony, North Carolina, displays of protest. And given that the protest included hundreds of people and took place near the town's courthouse, indicates that the feeling of discontent were not isolated to the large port cities of Boston, right? So I've got hundreds of people and in the town's courthouse. So there's my support. Does that make sense how that would be support? It's not enough to just say this is an example of an unfair tax. You've got to show why this led to tension. Well, it's expanding beyond just Boston. Okay. Then we have the historical situation surrounding the public bonfire was the Stamp Act created to generate revenue for the British debt. Okay, so for sourcing, I'm going to use historical situation, and this is all surrounding the Stamp Act. And I'm going to define it, okay? So all newspapers, paper, contracts, and documents had to pay a tax for a stamp to make them legal. Ultimately, the Stamp Act was repealed by Parliament after growing unrest in the colonies over tax led to non-importation boycotts. All right, do you see how my historical situation, I have to do more than just say, this is about the Stamp Act, because the Stamp Act was referenced in the document. The situation here is that eventually it was repealed, so their protest works. So I've explained that. Could you also use this as purpose, maybe? The purpose of the protest would have been to force the repeal of the tax by Parliament. Sure, you could have done that a different way. Okay. Any questions about the use of that particular document? I don't know why it keeps muting everything. Any questions about the use of that document? Nope. All right. So let's keep going. So here I have another example of an early tax on the colonies that added to the tension was the Sugar Act. So again, here's my money points. This is where I'm just getting racking up a lot of points, would be using outside information. So I've explained that this is another example. I've been very clear for the reader to show what I'm doing here. But I've got to define why this Sugar Act caused tension. It caused tension. The colonies had smuggled sugar into the colonies for decades without paying any taxes. The Sugar Act, although lowering the actual tax rate, was enforced by additional tax collectors being sent to the colonies. This, like the Stamp Act, added to tension because the colonies believed the new taxes and added oversight were unfair since they did not have representation in Parliament. Any questions about how you would use outside information here? You have to do more than just drop in the name. You've got to explain how it's a further example. No questions about that? All right. So then my next body paragraph, another cause of tension between Great Britain and her colonies was the increased number of Redcoat Army soldiers who patrolled the colonies and sometimes violently attacked colonists. So that's what I'm going to try to prove right here in this topic sentence, is that there was more tension. Okay. The Bloody Massacre depicts engraving by Paul Revere in 1770 represents one such, one such event. The depiction of the Boston Massacre, that should say depicts or emphasizes the soldiers acting as the aggressor in the conflict as they are shown firing their weapons on a crowd of unarmed colonists. So I've identified the document here, and then because it's an image. Now, there will be 5 documents. They've said one of the 5 will be an image of some sort, a picture, a political cartoon, or a graph or a chart. So I've got to explain what is in the image. So it's showing the soldiers acting as the aggressor by firing their weapons on the crowd. So there's my description. Okay. This represents a cause of growing tension because the colonists were still British subjects and the British Army was firing on and killing the very people they were sent to protect and monitor. All right, so I'm going to give myself support here, although I'm not totally certain that that I've actually supported it very well. It's clearly showing the tension, but I've added in here this point about them still all being British subjects, that their identity really hasn't changed just yet. And I did that to kind of set up my third body paragraph. Okay, I chose to use purpose for this one as my sourcing. The purpose of the engraving was for it to be widely distributed among all of the colonies in their newspapers to draw more support for the patriot cause. By vividly representing the British as the aggressor in the incident, more colonists are likely to be outraged and fear that a similar tragedy could happen in their own community, not just in Boston. Okay, so I've explained, here's the purpose, here's why this was a purpose. You can't just say the purpose was to draw attention. The purpose or the intended audience was other colonies. Well, why? You've got to explain the how or the why here in your sourcing. Okay, here I've got some more outside information. Actually, no, I've got another document. Okay, another incident in which the British Army was provoking the tension between them was in the attacks at Lexington and Concord, just outside of Boston. General Gage ordered the Redcoats to go and seize the colonial stockpile of weapons in April of 1775. So there's my description. Although the order instructed the soldiers to not hurt citizens and or private property, the event ultimately turned into a violent conflict as the colonists were already in position to ambush the soldiers at Concord and fired on them as they retreated back to Boston. So is that support or is that sourcing?
One thing it can happen is that the Cisco VPN.
Isn't it a historical situation?
I would agree. So I would say that that's actually historical situation here, because we're saying what ends up happening. It didn't work, right? Ultimately, it turned into a violent conflict because they were already in place and fired on them. This further indicates tension due to the violence that erupted from both sides. All right, this is an attempt at sourcing, but I think it's kind of weak here. So I'm probably not going to give myself credit for that. Okay, next body paragraph. While tension resulted from taxation and military oversight, the greatest cause, notice again that I have really been clear that this is the greatest one. I've made the priority here. Was the growing American identity that spread among the colonies. No longer did the colonists view themselves as British subjects. Instead, they viewed themselves as uniquely American and desired to be independent. So there's my explanation. The Declaration of Independence, issued in July of 1776, reflects this American identity by listing abuses of the king on us. They indicate that they are a collective group who are not part of the king's control anymore. All right, so that is, I've explained what's there. And then my support is to say that because they've got this part here, us, that they are a collective group, not part of the king's control. The point of view from which this document was written is one of a patriot who believes in the philosophical ideas of natural rights and John Locke's social contract theory that indicates they have a right to overthrow a government when it becomes abusive. All right, so I've got point of view, that it's somebody of a patriot. Here's why this is an explanation of a patriot point of view, because they've got natural rights, and we've talked about the ability to overthrow that government. The list of grievances in the Declaration of Independence provides justification for them to break with Great Britain and act as Americans. Okay? Another example of when the colonists began to create their critical new American identity was the immensely popular book, Common Sense. So here's my outside information by Thomas Paine. His book urged the colonists to shift blame for their troubles from Parliament to the King and to consider their arrangement as colonies more carefully. North America had land and resources. Why should the colonists remain subordinate to Britain? Instead, Paine urged them to proclaim independence. All right, so there is my essay. So I want to go back and let's count up how many points I would have earned. Okay, so would you give me points for contextualization? Yes. Thesis? Yes. I described 2 documents. I supported 2, I think. Yep. Did I support 4? Nope. Did I source 1? Yes. Did I source 2? Yes. And I had 2 pieces of outside information. So that essay would have earned me an 8 out of 10, which honestly, I think an 8 out of 10, a 7 out of 10 is going to be an excellent, excellent score on this DBQ. Any questions about that? And I will be honest, that took me more than 45 minutes because I had my phone out and I was interrupted multiple times. But I think I probably would have needed to streamline some of my explanation. All right, so I'll stop there before we get into the second one. Any comments or any questions about that? Everybody remembering how to do this now?
Is there, like, what's the difference between sourcing and supporting? Because I'm kind of finding an overlap, at least looking at my essay that I wrote.
Well, your support, I mean, your sourcing would be HAP, historical situation, intended audience, purpose, and point of view. And you actually have to support your claim with that sourcing. So it does overlap because you can't just identify who the audience is without explaining how it helps to prove your point. Sourcing is identifying how this particular document adds to your argument in a certain way. Does that make sense? Because it does overlap.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, did anybody do DBQ number 2? Anybody do number 2? I thought DBQ number 2 was much more difficult if you tried it.
Yeah, that's possible. There are examples.
All right, so let's go on with this. And we are right on time to be able to have time to finish. Okay. Evaluate the extent to which the ratification of the Constitution fostered political change in the United States from 1777 to 1800. So this is going to be continuity and change over time. We are looking at ratification of the Constitution, so that big debate, and 1777, so this would be during the Revolution, through 1800 is the election of Jefferson. Okay, so those are our time periods. We've got the Articles of Confederation. So here's why they made this time period 1777. If the ratification debate doesn't start until the late 1780s, why would they open up this time period to 1777? It's because you've got to show change. And so the Articles of Confederation were initially accepted in 1777. So that's why they've got that time period as listed. So the big takeaway here is that the state remains in power. So this is all about state power. They've also got here that no state without consent of the Congress shall have they can't get involved in any foreign affairs. So it's state power, but no foreign affairs is what they're highlighting in this part of the Articles of Confederation. Then we've got document 2. And this one may have thrown some people off because we really didn't emphasize this in time period 3, but it is, I'm glad that this is in here because it is something worth pointing out. We've discussed the Federalist Papers, which were articles in the New York newspapers to try to persuade people to ratify the Constitution. Notice the date here, 1787 and 1788. These are the years where ratification was being argued about. So this is in New York, and this one is in New York, okay? But here you have Brutus #1, unknown author, and this is being very critical of a strong federal government. So this is opposed to ratification, all right? So it opposes ratification. And the big issue here are the courts. Supreme Court, too powerful. Then here you've got James Madison in Federalist #45. So we know that this is the Federalist Papers that were meant to persuade people to support the ratification. So already I'm thinking sourcing, I'm thinking this is, the purpose is to persuade to pass, and the purpose up here is to persuade to oppose the Constitution. So I've already got planned my 2 pieces of sourcing that I need. And this is talking about that in no way would the states be given too much power, that that state powers, states are protected and they won't be abused by this new federal government. Then in the next document, this is one, we actually had one like this on our test that we took back first semester, if you'll remember this. But the signature or the heading at the top was not in Latin. But I have no idea what this means, to be honest with you. So I'm going to ignore that. But I'm going to try to figure out what's going on here with all of the other information. So this is the period of ratification. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8 state pillars already connected. And then this one, it will rise. Here's Virginia. And then you've got these others that are about to rise. So this is talking about that one of the provisions of ratification, you needed 9 states to ratify in order for it to go into effect. So if we've got 8 already, then this is encouraging and saying that it will happen. All right, so this, I'll be honest with you right now, this is the one that I'm not going to use. And I'm not going to spend time stressing over it if I already see one that I don't know what this means. And I'm not really sure how I could really use this to show change very easily. Okay, and then the last one, resolutions adopted by Kentucky in 1798. So I need to think about, all right, 1798 is a little bit later. This would be during Adams' administration. And we know that he's all about the Alien and Sedition Acts. And this is the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. So here I've already got my historical situation planned out because I know what this is talking about. And this is saying that the states are not going to follow along with this law. Let me look down here where it talked about it. Somewhere in here, and I can't find it right off the bat, but it was saying that when the law is unfair, they're not going to follow it. All right, so those are our documents and our planning. Here's how I set this up. I did continuity and change. I only had 2 paragraphs this time. I didn't have a third body paragraph. I'm going to use one change here, that the states are going to be losing some power in this format of the new Constitution. So that's what changes. So I'm going to use documents 2, 4, and 5. Okay, so here he's saying that they're going to lose some power. States might lose power. Document 4, this might say if they ratify, then the states might lose some power. And then here, certainly Kentucky resolutions is all about this fear of losing some power. And then my continuity is that even during the Articles of Confederation, the federal government was in charge of dealing with other nations. That's something that does not change with the new Constitution. So that would certainly be here in document 1, and it would be here in Federalist 45, where he talks about foreign affairs being the primary role of the federal government, and everything else is going to be given to the states. Okay, so here's how I wrote this. If I go back to the original question, and it's evaluating, nope, that's not the right. Here's my original question. The extent to which ratification of the Constitution fostered change. My context, I need to say, all right, so if we had one form of government and now we're going to change it, what led to the change? What led to changes in the government? Can you give me some ideas of what I might include there? What indicated to the colonists that they needed to change from the Articles of Confederation?
Shays Rebellion.
Absolutely. So Shays Rebellion is going to be in here in my context. And I might also bring in something about the, which is tied to the no standing army. And then the financial problems that the country was faced with, and they didn't have a way to tax. So very good. So here's what I had for my contextualization. The United States operated its government under the limited framework of the Articles of Confederation until it was clear that a change was necessary. So here's where I'm headed. I'm going to show why was that change necessary. The problems of the Articles were highlighted in Shays Rebellion. So there's my vocab word, but I have to define it, right? An incident in Massachusetts during the 1780s. The economic strife many farmers in the U.S. faced after the American Revolution led to many land foreclosures. Daniel Shays led a group in opposition to the court proceedings that would cost them their land. Because there was no standing national army in the United States under the Articles of Confederation, the state would have to put down the rebellion on its own. This incident led to calls for increased federal power. So here's my transition into the question. So I've got my example here that I'm building up the background. Now I'm transitioning into the question. This incident led to calls for increased federal power. Ultimately, the Constitutional Convention was held in Philadelphia. So here's another piece of vocab that's in here where I'm explaining that I know that this was all put together to create this new, stronger framework for government. All right, so then here's my thesis. The ratification of this new Constitution changed the balance of power from being primarily held by the states to instead being shared between federal and state levels. All right, so we share federal and state, or we share power now. We don't just shift everything to the federal government. It's shared under our new system. However, the responsibility for representing the U.S. in foreign affairs did not change and continue to remain a priority. So this is paragraph 1. This is paragraph 2. Any questions about my thesis? All right, how are we doing on time? Perfect. Okay, topic sentence number 1, ratification of the new Constitution resulted in the states losing some of their power and being more balanced between the federal and the state levels. Okay, so this is what I'm trying to prove. There's my topic sentence. Under the original Articles of Confederation, the states maintained most of their power as indicated by the loose connection of states and emphasis on protecting those states from federal overreach. Okay, so here's my description of document 1. So I've identified what the document is, and I've said what happens. All right, now you could have included which article within the Articles of Confederation that was part of. You could have said in Article 2 and then summarized what it says there, because I actually use document 1 in both of my body paragraphs, as you'll see in just a second. Okay, the purpose, so here's some sourcing. The purpose of this governmental structure was to prevent a monarchy from forming and to protect the new independence of the United States. Okay, actually, so this could be sourcing, but I've also got it as my support, because I'm indicating why they had set this document up in the way that they did. Okay. Yeah, actually, I'm going to leave that as purpose. All right, so the purpose was to protect the new independent U.S. citizens from tyranny. This sphere is clearly referenced by Brutus number 1, which appeared in a New York newspaper during the ratification debate of 1787. The article outlines the potential threat that a new federal court system would pose to state courts. So I've described document number 2. I've got Brutus number 1, and I've said what's in that document. Okay. The unknown author indicates this change in court structure would take away some state powers previously in place. Okay, so there's my support. Given that the new Constitution was ultimately ratified, this shows that states did indeed lose some power to create a more balanced system of federalism. Okay, the purpose of Brutus number 1 article was to try to persuade, right? So here's the purpose. We want to persuade New Yorkers not to ratify the newly proposed Constitution. Because, why is this the purpose? Because the reduction of state power would be required. Although his purpose was not achieved, the Brutus article emphasizes the concerns many Americans had with the possibility of shifting more power to the federal government. Okay. Then my next document, the Kentucky Resolution of 1798, also shows the changes of state power related to the ratification of the new Constitution. The state claimed that they had not given complete authority to the federal government when it came to following federal policy they believed overstepped authority. So I've described what's in the document. I should have, so this is document 5, okay? This shows a change in state power because the federal government was enacting more far-reaching laws that caused the states to respond in protest. The situation that led to the Kentucky Resolution was John Adams' passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts. All right, so here's my historical situation. Alien and Sedition Act. Kentucky and Virginia passed state laws refusing to submit to a federal law that they deemed as infringing on individual rights. Ultimately, these states' actions were struck down by the Marbury versus Madison ruling, which established judicial review as a function of the Supreme Court. Could this be my outside information? Yes. All right, so this is, again, where we're seeing the shift in power, okay? Judicial review is a function of the Supreme Court and not the state level. This situation ultimately shows that the states could not act on their own to challenge a federal law, thus changing the power the states once held. Any questions about that body paragraph? Let me stop here and ask real quick. Any questions that I can answer on this body paragraph? No? All right, so let's finish up with the last body paragraph. One component of power distribution that did not change, all right, so here's my topic sentence, was the federal oversight of foreign affairs. As indicated in the original framework of the Articles of Confederation, the responsibility for interaction with leaders of other nations rests solely with the federal government. So again, I'm using document 1 a second time. I can do that because I'm using a different part. Now, I would not get credit like if I had only used this document, but I used it twice. That wouldn't give me credit for 2 different documents being used. But I'm not worried about that because I'm going to use this as part of my argument. The new Constitution framework did not change this as seen by Madison's argument in Federalist number 45. So to show that there was no change, I had to use how the Articles of Confederation already had this in place. And then here, we're not changing that. Do you see why that was necessary to show a continuity? Okay, so Madison reiterates in the January 1788 article to the people of New York that one of the main defined powers of the federal government was to be in international relations. So I've described what's in Federalist 45 and I've identified when it was written and who wrote it. This shows consistency with the framework set up under the Articles of Confederation in that the states should not negotiate to or interact alone with other countries. All right, so I've shown why this is the same because in both of them, the states can't act on their own. The purpose of Madison's Federalist number 45 is to persuade New Yorkers in the ratification debate that the new Constitution should be ratified. Where Brutus is saying it should not, he's saying that it should. And it explains that the powers in the federal and foreign affairs were consistent with the past and necessary. All right, another example, right? So here I've got some more outside information showing the consistency in foreign power residing with the states is the negotiation of treaties with other nations. During the early years of the Articles of Confederation, the U.S. negotiated an alliance with France to help fight in the Revolutionary War. The Continental Congress represented the group of states in the alliance, and the alliance was not made with only a single state. So I'm showing how in this early period, they've negotiated with another country. And then I'm also going to show how in the later period, they negotiated with another country as well under the new Constitution. During the early years of the new Constitution's existence, the United States negotiated with Spain in Pinckney's Treaty to access to use the Mississippi River and the port at New Orleans for trade. This treaty was negotiated by the federal government for the states at large and not only by Louisiana for its own use. So I've shown that this was a continuity in my outside information. All right, so let's go back and see how we did. I don't think I scored as many points on this one. So I've got contextualization and I have thesis. I know I've described 2 documents. Did I support 2 documents? Yes, I supported 2 documents. Did I support 4? No. Did I source 1 document? Yes. And did I support a second one or source it? Yes. Do I have 2 pieces of outside information? Yes, I actually have 3. So really, I got the same score. I got an 8 on this one as well. But I thought this one was much more difficult in terms of trying to figure out how to argue it with only the 5 documents. Okay, so let me stop sharing, unmute everybody, and let me answer any questions that you may have. What can I help with?
How many points do you think you would need to get a 5 on the exam?
How many points do you need to get a 5? Is that what you asked?
Yeah.
Again, when they did the webinar last night, they said that they don't know yet because they haven't read everybody's exams. And what they're going to do, they're basically going to scale it. So once they've scored everybody's exam, then they're going to figure out the cut score. So the percentage of people who get 5s in the United States is, I don't know, it's less than 10%. So they would figure out where does that kind of fall in the range. Mr. Minnick and I have been trying to figure this out. I'm thinking if you get an 8 or a 9, you're probably going to get a 5 and possibly even a 7, because I don't think that kids who have not been writing DBQs all year are going to do very well on this. But you guys will, because you understand what's being looked for and you know how to play the game to maximize your points. So I would say if you're shooting for a 5, you need to probably aim for 8 or 9 points to be safe, and potentially 7 would get you that 5. And again, this is all just a guess. I would think probably a 6 or a 7 would be pretty safe in terms of a 4. And maybe, or the 6 is going to be kind of the question mark. I don't know if a 6 would be a 3 or a 4. I don't see how, if you get more than half of the points, you wouldn't pass. So if you get a 6, I would really think that you're going to pass. But again, I don't know how many you would need for 5. Any other questions? That's a good one.
Are there any other places where we could get prompts or more resources to use to like getting practice with this?
Yeah, there are, well, in your AMSCO book, there are a lot of DBQs in there that you can use, and just, you know, even if you're practicing with 7 documents, you could still time yourself with the 45 minutes, but use the new rubric and see where you are, if that makes sense. I'm going to try to find 2 per week, which would mean if you did both of them every week, that would mean that you had done 10 of them as practice, which I think is pretty good. I do highly recommend that you practice typing and handwriting and see what you're more comfortable with, because you want to really, going into this, you don't want that part of it slowing you down. Anything else I can help with?
Can you post your written DBQs to Canvas just so we can go back and see if we need to?
Oh, you want me to take pictures of it and put it in as a PDF
Yes, please.
where I've highlighted it? I will be glad to. And the second one, I'm not as confident with, honestly, as the first one. The second one, I didn't really like the prompt. And I got these prompts from a teacher in South Carolina. And I like the first one a lot. The second one, I think, is a little shaky.
For the real exam, do we get to choose between handwriting or typing?
Yes, you'll get to choose. And that's why I'm saying that you want to practice and figure out which you're most comfortable with. So was this format of going over these, does this work for everybody?
Yes.
How else could we change
Yes.
this up? All right. Well, if nobody has any other questions, I appreciate you tuning in today. And I, again, every Thursday, we're going to plan to do this and really focus on the skills of practicing those DBQs. Where you're going to get the best practice is actually doing it yourself. And then trading with somebody else that you know in the class that's done this and score each other's. Because if you're trying to look back and pick out what they've been able to write, then you're going to get more familiar with what you need to include and how to be clear. And really try to stick to that 45 minutes. Set a timer and put everything else away. Don't get distracted like I did yesterday with the phone going off 10,000 times while I was trying to write this. So I hope that helps. And then tomorrow I'll have the video posted, which is the review packet that helps with interpreting some documents and some of those skills and some of just the basic content. I think this is been a good week, and I hope that you feel really comfortable with this time period with the revolution and the lead up. Do you feel comfortable with the content now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So hopefully by doing this each week, you're going to be really, really prepared content-wise, and then it's just a matter of doing what you know how to do on these essays, and I think everybody's going to do great. You don't really need to worry about this a ton if you've prepared and you've done the practice. I think you're going to be just fine. Any questions? All right. Did Riley already leave? Riley already gone? All right. Okay, so have a wonderful day, and I will upload this video to YouTube like I did the vocab review on Monday and concept outline review. So this will be there, and then like Neil was asking, I will add this also as a PDF of my answers. So have a wonderful day, and I will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Webb.
Bye. Miss you guys.
Bye.